Much obliged for you joining us on this morning's edition of Israel-Hamas War. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up today, the World Health Organization says the situation in Gaza is getting worse by the hour. The United States says Israel is not doing enough to allow more fuel or aid into Gaza. Plus, Hamas says no more negotiations or exchange of detainees until aggression against Gaza stops. A World Health Organization official in Gaza said on Tuesday that the situation was deteriorating by the hour as Israeli bombing has intensified in the south of the Palestinian enclave around the cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah. Richard Pippercorn, the World Health Organization representative in Gaza, told reporters via video link that WHO was deeply concerned, that is, the organization was concerned, about the vulnerability of the health system in the densely populated area as more people move further south to escape the bombing. James Elder, spokesperson for UNICEF, says the areas of Gaza designed as safe by Israel were nowhere near meeting basic requirements, warning that the absence of sanitation and shelter have created a perfect storm for disease outbreak.
Situation is getting worse by the hour. I mean, like there's intensified bombing going on all around, including here in the southern areas, Khan Yunis, and even in Rafah. Even what I've seen over the last couple of days, that we see an vastly increasing number of IDPs coming from the so-called middle area, and even now the southern areas towards furthermore to the south. And I think we are closer by it's humanity's darkest hour, and this has been the message, I think, from WHO, the UN in general. This bombings and I would say a senseless loss of life must stop now. I mean, we need a sustained ceasefire. Maybe I want to say something about maybe our biggest concern, and that is the vulnerability. The vulnerability of and looking at for a health perspective, the vulnerability of the health infrastructure. So the health infrastructure in Gaza, the health system is crippled.
It's not a safe zone if it's only free from bombardment, as some zones have not been. It's a safe zone when you can guarantee the conditions of food, water, medicine, and shelter. Okay? Now, I've seen for myself, these are entirely absent. You cannot overstate this. These are tiny patches of barren land, or they're street corners, they're sidewalks, they're half-built buildings. There is no water, not a little bit. There's no water, no facilities, no shelter from the cold and the rain. So we have the perfect storm for disease outbreak. Remembering, of course, in this specific case of Gaza, Israel is the occupying power. It's they who have to provide food, water, medicine. So now, given we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people right now, this minute, who are moving somewhere with bombardments at scale, 200 a day yesterday, aerial bombardments, as we speak, the only possible way to create safe spaces in Gaza that are truly safe, that protect human life, is for the hell to stop raining down from the sky.
Now, Israel is said to not be doing enough to allow more fuel and aid into Gaza, and she'll step up efforts. That's coming from the State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller, adding that Washington is engaging with Israel to allow more trucks in.
I will say that what the United States is doing to address that very situation is, number one, making clear to Israel that we do not want to see this campaign conducted in the South the way it has been conducted in the North. We are 4 or 5 days into this campaign in the South. It's just started again after the pause. It's too early to make, I think, overall assessments about how it's going, but certainly I know for civilians on the ground, conditions are incredibly difficult. We are engaging with the government of Israel at every level to try to increase the amount of humanitarian assistance that is getting in so people do have food and people do have water. We are working with UNRWA to try to identify sites where civilians can go to be safe from harm, and working with the government of Israel to ensure that those sites are protected and are not targeted. There is not enough being done right now. The level of assistance that's getting in is not sufficient. It needs to go up, and we've made that clear to the government of Israel. The level of fuel that is going in is not sufficient. It needs to go up, and we have made that clear to the government of Israel. And we will continue to engage with them on every level, precisely to try and address the very real human suffering that your family member is going through, and we know so many civilians in Gaza are. There is not enough fuel, there's not enough food, there's not enough water getting in. The number of trucks currently getting in, around 100 a day, I think it was 100 yesterday, is lower than it was during the pause. It needs to be higher.
Right.
And we are engaging with the Israeli government to encourage them to allow more trucks to get in.
Israeli forces say they've tightened the noose around southern Gaza's main city of Khan Yunis in what they call the most intense day of combat in 5 weeks of ground operations against Hamas. In what appeared to be the biggest ground assault in Gaza since the truce with Hamas terrorists unraveled last week, Israel says its troops, who are supported by warplanes, had reached the heart of Khan Yunis and were also surrounding the city. The commander of Israeli Military Southern Command, General Yaron Finkelman, said in a statement, Israeli forces were also fighting in Jabalia, a large urban refugee camp, and Hamas hotbed in northern Gaza, next in Gaza City, and in Shujaiya, east of the city. After days of ordering residents to flee the area, Israeli forces dropped new leaflets on Tuesday with instructions to stay inside shelters and hospitals during the assault. In their words, "Don't get out. Going out is dangerous. You have been warned," said the leaflets, addressed to residents of 6 districts, mounting to around a quarter of Khan Yunis. Meanwhile, a video release is said to have shown Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the military wing, fighting in Khan Yunis in what Israeli forces call the most intense day of combat in 5 weeks of ground operations. It can be seen, that is, the terrorists can be seen shooting guns and operating rocket launchers in the video, though the video is not able to confirm the location nor the date it was filmed. Relatives of hostages held by Hamas remembered their loved ones and urged action to secure more releases in an event led by members of the U.S. House Committee on Foreign Affairs on Tuesday. The families told stories of the captures and spoke about their worries as their relatives remain in captivity. Jonathan Dekel Chen's 35-year-old son, Sagi, was taken hostage on October the 7th. He reminded the attendees that every day, every moment counts, adding that many of the hostages are injured and not receiving proper medical attention. Moshe Lavi, whose brother-in-law is being held, says every second in captivity is an eternity. The event came as the British government confirmed that Britain's defense ministry will conduct surveillance flights over Gaza in an effort to locate hostages. Meanwhile, Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani said on Tuesday that Qatar is working to restore the truce and secure the release of more hostages.
And it is shocking to me that we hard to move forward, hard to sleep, hard to want. I just can't imagine going through what you're going through. But yet you're still standing strong, and you're here to tell the world, please don't forget. Don't forget our family. Let's bring them home. Let the dialogue and conversation continue. Let's not just forget and move forward while these families are still suffering because their loved ones are held hostage by Hamas.
You have to forgive me if I stumble a little bit. My heart breaks every day, and talking about this every day is a new, thank you, sweetheart, is a new sort of impossibility telling the story, but we'll tell the story again.
Sagi is one young man of approximately 130 hostages who are still being held. As Gillian mentioned, every day, every moment counts. We know that many of the hostages are injured. We know that they're not receiving proper medical help. We know that the Red Cross has not been allowed into Gaza in order to visit with the hostages.
Many people say that their voice is not being heard right now, and I want to say it's not true. They are being held in the worst place a human being can imagine. They're being held by Hamas, but their voice is the silent that we get from, unfortunately, many countries around the world, and the silent that we cannot hear them, but it is a voice, and I want to bring it here.
Meanwhile, Hamas official Osama Hamdan says there will be no negotiations nor exchange of detainees until Israel's aggression, according to him, against the Gaza Strip stops. He adds that Hamas holds Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fully responsible for the lives of the Israeli hostages and for obstructing the completion of the exchange deal. His address in Beirut, Lebanon, came on the day Israeli forces stormed southern Gaza's main city in what they call the most intense day of combat in 5 weeks of ground operations against Hamas terrorists. Hamas armed wing, the Al-Qassam Brigades, say its fighters have destroyed or damaged 24 Israeli military vehicles, and snipers had killed or wounded 8 Israeli soldiers in ongoing clashes in various areas of Khan Yunis. Joining us now is Right Honorable Ikunyi Owaji Ibani, who's also an international affairs analyst. Thank you for being on the program this morning, and welcome. If you can hear me, thank you for being on the program this morning. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me yet again.
Okay, we do apologize for the delay in your audio. Right, we do apologize. We'll try and fix that. And let me go straight to the question in the meantime, if it is possible. Now, with the humanitarian disaster continuously unfolding in the Gaza Strip, and we understand 1.9 million Palestinians have been displaced. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, over 16,000 people have lost their lives on the Palestinian side after the incursion of the IDF into Gaza, the northern and southern part. What do you make of UNICEF's James Elder saying, as we have reported this morning, that calling Israel the occupying power and being responsible for food and electricity and power and supplies for Gaza as they try to make sure that humanitarian aid gets into the Strip? Electricity and power and supplies for Gaza as they try to make sure that humanitarian aid gets into the Strip. Okay, we do apologize. We'll try and bring back Right Honorable Ikunyi in a moment.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go on.
Gaza as they try to make sure that humanitarian aid gets into the Strip. Okay, we do apologize. We'll try and bring back Right Honorable Ikunyi in a moment.
Okay, Right Honorable Ikunyi, I'm so sorry. We'd like to let you know that maybe you're listening to the program through your television and you should desist, so that turn the volume down, and so we can fix the technical aspect of our conversation. In the meantime, while we try and fix that so we can speak to the Right Honorable, we will continue with the U.S. State Department, who are imposing visa bans against individuals involved in undermining peace, security, or stability in the occupied West Bank. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said this in a statement on Tuesday, announcing a new visa restriction policy. The restrictions will target those who have committed acts of violence or taking other action that restrict civilians' access to essential services and basic necessities, and may also apply to those individuals' family members, according to Secretary Blinken. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller told reporters the first bans under the new policy will be imposed and more designations will be made in the coming days, adding it will ultimately impact dozens of people. Any Israeli with an existing visa who was targeted will be notified that their visa was revoked.
The West Bank this year is at levels not seen since the Second Intifada. And in recent weeks, an alarming surge in violent acts has driven this unwelcome record even higher. This includes unprecedented levels of violence by Israeli extremist settlers targeting Palestinians and their property, displacing entire communities, as well as violence by Palestinian extremist militants against Israeli civilians. Today, as President Biden recently warned, the United States is taking action to address this escalating violence in the West Bank by implementing a new visa restriction policy under Section 212A3C of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Under this policy, the United States will pursue visa restrictions against individuals involved in or meaningfully contributing to the undermining of peace, security, or stability in the West Bank. This includes acts of violence against persons or property, as well as undue restrictions on civilians' access to essential services and basic necessities. Immediate family members of such persons may also be subject to these restrictions. The Department is pursuing initial action against individuals pursuant to this visa restriction policy today. We will designate additional individuals pursuant to this policy in the coming days. We unequivocally condemn attacks by violent Israeli extremists against Palestinians and those by violent Palestinian extremists against Israelis. These acts threaten West Bank stability in the immediate term and take us further away from a future in which Palestinians and Israelis can both live in peace and security in two states. They are happening today. Whether they happened before I came out to this podium or they're happening this afternoon, they're happening today, and we will have more coming in the coming days. We expect ultimately for this action to impact dozens of individuals and potentially their family members.
Coming up, U.S. Congress questions Harvard, MIT, and residents on campus anti-Semitism. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our coverage of Israel-Hamas war this morning. The show continues with a conversation with Right Honorable Ikunyi Owaji Ibani, International Affairs Analyst, who joins us on the program this morning. Good morning again. Welcome to the program. We apologize, I couldn't speak to you earlier.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me yet again this morning.
You're welcome. Now, as it stands, the fighting, according to the IDF, has intensified to the most intense since the combat started in the Gaza Strip. And as that has happened, 1.9 million Palestinians have been displaced. Over 16,000 deaths have occurred in the Gaza Strip, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The UNICEF spokesperson, James Elder, was taking Israel to task over this issue, saying that Israel as the occupying power. What is this business about calling Israel the occupying power? Does that help the situation? And do they have responsibility to provide for the Gaza Strip?
But the term occupying power emanates from right of ownership. As a Palestinian, you would believe that the land belongs to you and that Israel taking charge of certain aspects of land you believe is their own. That is where the term emanates from, occupying power. They don't see the land or Gaza Strip as belonging to the Israelis. They don't also see West Bank belonging to the Israelis. Even beyond that, you know the contention between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So that is the origin of that occupying power. You know, before the declaration of the State of Israel in 1948, you have seen the hostilities between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Up till this moment, it still rages on. So the term is up according to the Palestinians that Israel is an occupying power. That terminology is used both in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank.
So does that not mean that UNICEF, that is United Nations International, does that not mean that UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, have taken sides against Israel, making their jobs as United Nations harder? If that is a Palestinian belief, that Israel is an occupying power, and James Elder, speaking for UNICEF, continuously refers to Israel as an occupying power, then that means that the United Nations is supporting Palestine. End of story.
Can you come again, because I need to get it clear so that I can answer clearly. Are you asking?
Does the fact that the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund refer to and take Israel to be an occupying power mean that the United Nations isn't neutral in this conflict?
That United Nations or UNICEF referring to Israel as occupying power?
Yes.
That is what you are asking. Yes. Of course, you will know that the problem, I have identified this problem before in my area appearance on your program. The time has come for United Nations to ensure that the right thing is done. Now, look at where they have gotten to. The legitimacy of this war, the support Israel has before, is scaling down every day, given the humanitarian crisis and conditions found in Gaza today. That is why you can see a shift in terms of statements by United Nations agencies, or even the chief tribe of United Nations himself. You can see a shift from the beginning, statements that have been made by different actors on the international stage. So making reference to Israel at this point by UNICEF as an occupying power is not something that has not been talked to. The only problem there is in this situation is the inability of the international community as represented by the United Nations as the international police of the world, the international police officer of the world, to ensure security, to ensure happiness for all segments of society, for all states, for all countries, even the minority. This is a failure of international community as represented by the United Nations at this point. That is why you can see at different levels, at different strata of the United Nations, you can see statements, because people are becoming tired of certain conditions repeating over and over. So what you find, you will even find more. You will even find more at other levels of the United Nations, different organs of the United Nations, also making reference to Israel as an occupying power. You will know there is what is called compassion fatigue in sociology. Someone can drive you to a particular point and the person develops fatigue. It is known as compassion fatigue. The world today, even the international community, is also developing fatigue because of the outcome, especially of this 2023 Israeli-Hamas war.
If that is the case, go on, please. Go on.
I'm with you.
Okay, if that is the case, then
I believe that with the benefit of hindsight and with the way the support is going now, in terms of giving people what belongs to them, I think that the international community will go beyond where we are on Palestinian question to ensure that peace will reign between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I think if I want to speak my mind, to my mind, I want the United Nations to do the proper thing at this point, because carnage seen on television on a daily basis, it weakens and places moral burden on everyone who sees it, who views it, and thinks that humanity is one. Except humanity is not one. If humanity is one, the carnage, the bloodletting you are seeing, there is no one that will give support, either on the part of Hamas or Palestinians or on the part of Israelis.
Are you blaming Israel for this 2023 war between Israel and Hamas? Or are you blaming Hamas? Or let me rephrase it, who do you hold responsible for the October 7 attack?
Can you come again?
Who do you hold responsible for the October 7 attack on Israel? Hamas or Israel?
Who do I hold responsible for the October 7th attack?
Yes. Or who should the world hold responsible? Yes.
The known culprit that should be held responsible is Hamas. But on the other hand, you should also know that Hamas did not act alone. Hamas, having support from Iran, decided to use the lack of Iran to weave trade. You know, in my local area, we talk of a group of people like Yakwete people. If you want to weave trade, you don't use another person's lab to weave trade, you use their own lab. But Hamas relied heavily on Iran to undertake this attack. So, two things. You must blame Hamas for giving in so easily, believing that Iran can give them such support to engage in such destruction or conflict. But in between now, they are seeing differently. So my own take on this, if you want me to place blame, I will blame Hamas, I will blame Iran. Because Iran was the first country to come up and praise that attack of October 7th by Hamas, confirming that they have knowledge and believing that since they give support to Hamas, that what Hamas did was right. But to my mind, what Hamas did was not right. The preemptive strike that Hamas engaged in was not right, because mediation, conciliation at the international level, if the United Nations wants to do what is right, at this point, not minding the regular boundaries between Israel and Palestinian people, they should be able at this point, after 70 years of declaration of the state of Israel, they should be able to also give the Palestinians their own state.
Hamas have said that there are no more negotiations or exchange of detainees until the aggression against the Gaza Strip stops, according to them. But Israel, on the other hand, have already said that there will be no ceasefire in the first place because Hamas broke the terms of the pause in military activity by A, firing upon Israel, by B, refusing to allow the 10 hostages per day as agreed, to increase per day the number of days of pause in fighting.
Can you come again?
Okay, we apologize for our audio issues here, but my question to you is, now that Hamas have said that they're not going to think of any sort of pause in hostilities, and Israel are on the same trajectory, there's an impasse. What do you think will be the closest solution? Should Qatar continue to mediate so more hostages can be released, so another military pause can occur?
Well, I praise first. Let me praise the Emir of Qatar for the role Qatar is playing in this conflict. I give it to him. He walks around the clock. He walks around the clock to ensure that there is peace. Because if there is no peace between Hamas and the Israelis, of course, the region is threatened. Recall that about yesterday, they had the Gulf Cooperation Council summit. There was the Gulf Cooperation Council summit that made yesterday, and statements were made. Even the Emir of Qatar also made statements. The statement he made And if you extract the statement, if you do an analysis of the statement of the Emir of Qatar, you find out that he's a peacemaker. He told the path of peace at all times, even in condemnation of the hostility or the war between Hamas and Israel. At all times, he will always terminate his statement with path of peace, because anyone who owns peace owns everything. So I give it to him. But let me also advise that Qatar should not stop. Qatar should continue, because a peacemaker is one that actually thinks of humanity as one. If Qatar stops now, you will find out that there will be no other country that will take the driving seat to ensure that this war is now asleep at the level of mediation, conciliation, and dialogue. Diplomacy should not be forgotten. If diplomacy is forgotten in the face of conflict, in the face of horror, in the face of bloodletting, in the face of humanitarian crisis, then we should know that the world will be coming to an end. Diplomacy should continue, and Qatar, who started it, should be able to continue to live. I give it to the Emir of Qatar. It should continue with what he is doing, and I believe that there must be an end in sight. And the end of it all should not only be a permanent ceasefire. Rather, we should go beyond cessation of hostility to a point where the Palestinian people should be able to have their own state. And I think America is also talking of that. If you listen to the statement of the President of America, the Defense, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, Lincoln, you will find out that there is a consensus, they are moving towards a consensus as to what will be done to engender peace and tranquility between Israelis and the Hamas people. And Hamas, not necessarily Hamas, but Palestinian people.
Okay, right, Honorable, if you're praising Qatar and if you're saying they are to be commended and that you call Qatar peacemakers, then why do they harbor Hamas leaders like Ismail Haniyeh, who's been viewed as a terrorist, and Hamas viewed as a terrorist organization? And that one of the reasons Hamas has support is because Qatar supports Hamas. And there have been calls for that if Qatar does not hand over the Hamas operatives it has, who they are harboring, who they are keeping in their country, to the detriment of peace in Israel, then Israel should possibly even break up diplomatic relations with Qatar. But obviously that's too big an ask at this time. So are they really peacemakers, as you say?
What I can tell you about international politics and international relations, there is no straight line, there is no linear line. International politics does not travel on a linear motion. You can see a graph. International politics can be traveling on a path of a particular graph. At some point, the point of curvature will either be so steep or can be gentle. So what you are trying to ask as to why Qatar is harboring some leaders of Hamas, you should know that sympathies vary at the international level. And you know the world now is not a unipolar world. You have, at a point, you have bipolarity, now multipolarity, and of course, multilateral relations can be entered into, depending on which side of the pendulum a particular country or a particular leader finds himself or the country finds herself at a particular point. You cannot, there is no way you can say that a Middle Eastern nation or a Middle Eastern ruler will not be able to have some level of sympathy for Palestinian people. So if, for any reason, someone who has such threat within his own domain, his own state, or maybe Palestinian land, has such threat and sought an asylum from United Arab Emirates or Qatar, as it were, there is no way they will not be granted. It is not because he is harboring some of the leaders of Hamas. That means he cannot seek for peace. The international system it's not straitjacketed. You cannot, because Hamas or Palestinians are having problems with Israelis, and they might have their brothers elsewhere in a place like Qatar seeking asylum, seeking refuge, then they will not be refused. Let me also tell you the other side of it. Demographically speaking, you know, when after the war and the state of Israel was declared, and by 1967 war, you know that the refugees, the Palestinian refugees, were now scattered virtually all over the world. You have them in South America, you have them in Jordan, you have them in Lebanon, you have them in Syria, you have them all over. Because you have these people as refugees in multi countries, you will find out that they will be having sympathy. When the Hamas war took place, the Hamas hostility by 2005, you can see the sympathy was not like this. But look at the whole war today. Virtually all regions of the world, all continents of the world, you are seeing demonstrations in one form or the other. So that is what you find. The international politics or international relations at that stage is not something that you can just put in a small, or maybe you use a tiny aperture to express and ask why is Qatar giving asylum or hosting some of the Hamas leaders. No, if you look at it that way, you are looking at it from a tiny aperture. Of course, it is not only Qatar that is hosting it. If you look what of Dalan, who was the head, the leader of Palestinian National Authority in Gaza, when Hamas took over, Dalan is the United Arab Emirates. You know that Dalan is the leader of a Palestinian National Authority in Gaza Strip before Hamas took over. So Dalan, if Dalan is in United Arab Emirates and others are in Qatar, that is how you look at international politics and international relations.
Well, it speaks to, obviously, it speaks, right, Honorable. It speaks to the situation in the Middle East and how complicated and complex it can be, and the situation that Israel finds itself with the nations surrounding it. We'll leave it there, and we thank you for coming on the program this morning. Right Honorable Ikunyi Owaji Ibani, who joined us from Port Harcourt, River State. Many thanks, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, as we continue on the program today, the Palestinian Red Crescent said 5 people have been injured after Israeli forces raided the West Bank city of Jenin on Tuesday afternoon. As the raid was ongoing, Israeli soldiers stopped and searched for ambulances going through the city, with paramedics saying they'd been stuck for 15 minutes. The ambulances were carrying patients from Nablus. One was transferred to the intensive care unit in Jenin's hospital. The West Bank has seen surging violence in parallel to Israel's 8-week-old war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, another territory where Palestinians seek statehood. After fleeing their homes and cities, Gazans now have to wait for hours in order to get clean water from the only desalination water plant in Rafah. Children and elderly lined up in long queues waiting for their turns to fill containers with water. Meanwhile, the biggest challenge for the workers at the plant was to provide needed fuel to desalinate the water. As Israel intensified its strikes on Khan Yunis, the number of displaced people doubled towards Rafah, escaping bombardment and death. On the 58th day of its war on Gaza, Israeli forces pressed ahead with their air and ground bombardment of the strip of the south, killing and wounding Palestinians, even as the United States, United Nations urged them to protect civilians. Hamas ally Islamic Jihad armed wing said its terrorists engaged in fierce clashes with Israeli soldiers north and east of Khan Yunis, Gaza's main southern city. Joining us now is Mr. Peter Dickinson, publisher of Business Ukraine magazine Lviv Today, and also editor at Odessa Review, who joins us at this moment. Good morning, and thank you for staying with us to get on the program, and thank you for being here right now.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, I must mention that with the Russia-Ukraine war still going on, and the danger, as propounded by Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, that the attention is waning, the public support possibly will wane, public attention of the Russia-Ukraine war will wane and turn to the Middle East. It seems that already is happening. Could we begin by what you view as the most salient issues right now as the war is entering almost its 60th day, 2 months between Israel and Hamas, even as in Russia and Ukraine the fighting continues and there's increased loss of life?
Yes, the media focus has shifted very clearly to the Israel-Hamas conflict in the last 2 months, but the fighting in Ukraine continues at the same intensity as it has been for most of the past 2 years now, almost. We're now at the 21st month mark of the war. We're in the 22nd month of this war, and the fighting remains as intense. The casualties remain as high as they have been throughout the war. So to give you an idea of how intense this fighting is, you know, the daily casualty figures released by the Ukrainian military for the Russian side, i.e. the number of Russian soldiers who are being killed on a daily basis, has been consistently over 1,000 for the last month or so. According to British military intelligence, Russia has been suffering its heaviest losses of the year. Now, those are unconfirmed figures, and we don't have any figures for Ukraine, but they are also believed to be high. So we are talking about a war in which thousands of soldiers are very likely dying every single day. And this is not even to touch upon the civilian casualties, the damage to cities and towns from Russian bombardments. So we're talking about a very major war, which is at a stage of high intensity, but the media cycle has shifted. The media spotlight has shifted to the Israel-Hamas conflict, where, of course, there are also very high casualties, great damage, but a far more localized conflict in terms of the physical area that is involved. So from a Ukrainian perspective, there is concern that international attention has moved on, and there is a need to remind people that the war in Ukraine is still continuing.
Indeed. How is it that with the notable Jewish Russian population and Jewish Ukrainian population for Russia, the President Vladimir Putin seems to have drawn his line in the sand and seems to be openly supporting Hamas? And in the case where he didn't have bad relations with Israel, what does that say of the Putin administration in its even bringing up and showing the kind of support it's showing for Hamas, to the extent that Hamas operatives visited in Russia and Hamas let go some or a particular captive held hostage in Gaza, citing Russia's support for Hamas in letting that Russian Jew or Russian Israeli individual leave?
Well, you are quite correct to say that Russia has been very strong in its support for the Palestinian side. They have been quite clear, quite outspoken in their criticism of Israel and their support for the Palestinian side, for Hamas itself, but also more broadly accusing Israel of going too far in its response and siding with the critics of Israel and the supporters of Palestine. This is part of Russia's broader geopolitical stance at the moment. The invasion of Ukraine has effectively burned Russia's bridges with the Western world. It has cut Russia's diplomatic and economic ties with particularly Europe. Russia was a major supplier of energy to Europe. That trade has now been dramatically reduced, and Russia has, even to the level of flights to and from Europe, visas being issued for European countries and so forth. So Russia has recognized that it does not have a good short or medium-term prospect of good ties with the West. Putin is committed to a long-term war with Ukraine. He is committed to destroying Ukraine, to removing Ukraine from the map, so that there will be simply a Russian empire in place of the former Ukraine in the Russian vision. So they are now repositioning the country to focus its foreign policy on the so-called global south, i.e. the non-Western world. So Russia's take on the Israel-Hamas war is very much part of that. It is a bid to say, look, Russia is not part of the West. We are not part of the European Western world. We stand with Palestine, and we are critical of Israel, whereas the West is on the contrary, very, very cautious of criticizing Israel. Russia has made a big effort to show they are, on the contrary, very critical of Israel. They stand with Palestine, and they wish to engage with and ingratiate themselves with the global south in general, and particularly with the Muslim world, where they see great potential for building new alliances and new relationships that can compensate for and replace the previous strategic partnerships that they've developed over many years with the West. So it's part of a very significant geopolitical shift that is going on in Russia today. And I think we can expect to see more of this as Russia turns away from the West, or is pushed away by the West, however you wish to interpret that, and looks to reinvent itself as a champion of the non-Western world, as a partner and as a leader for the non-Western world.
And obviously that puts them in bed with Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who says that Benjamin Netanyahu should be tried for war crimes and has refused to regard the terrorist activity of October 7 against Israel as such.
Yes, the Russians are now all in, I would say. I think they have shocked many, particularly Israelis, with the level of their rhetoric, of their criticism of Israel. Israel has traditionally had very close ties with Russia. The population of Israel includes a very large percentage of former Soviet citizens, most of whom would be considered or were typically called Russian Jews, although in fact a lot of them were from Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova and other former Soviet republics. But the population of Israel, I believe, is approximately 1/3 former Soviet Jewish population. So they have very deep, very intense ties with Israel and the former Soviet world and Russia. So there's always been a strong link there, and many in Israel have been shocked by the readiness of Russia to essentially turn on Israel and align itself with some of the more radical elements in the Muslim world who have been highly critical, of course, of Israel. Now, it's no surprise to hear this rhetoric coming from many Muslim leaders. It's par for the course. We've had this for many years on previous occasions. It is unprecedented, I believe, to hear this level of criticism coming from the Kremlin.
Is there anti-Semitism in Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine is the original European home of the Jewish people. Before the State of Israel was established, Ukraine was the largest residence of European Jews. We often hear people talk about Polish Jews and Russian Jews historically, Now, actually, those people largely who were typically referred to as Polish and Russian Jews, the majority actually lived in what is today Ukraine. A lot of the Jewish traditions, a lot of great Jewish leaders, the Hasidic movement within Judaism were founded in Ukraine. So Ukraine has a very, very rich Jewish history. It has historically had a very large Jewish population. Now, that history comes with a history of anti-Semitism, as is often the case with large Jewish populations. There are instances of anti-Semitism, but I would say that they are isolated incidents in a long history. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years of coexistence and cooperation and intermarriage in many respects, in many instances, within Ukrainian society, within the Jewish Ukrainian society and Ukraine. The president of Ukraine, of course, famously is Jewish. Volodymyr Zelensky is Jewish. Some of his grandfathers were actually killed in the Holocaust during the German occupation of World War II in Ukraine. So Ukraine has a very, very rich and complex Jewish history. Now, anti-Semitism is part of that, but it's actually quite a small part of a much broader history. And today's Jewish population in Ukraine are thriving, in fact. Zelensky is a symbol of that, but broadly speaking, it is growing, and many Ukrainian Jews today are for the first time actually feeling themselves Ukrainians as well as Jewish, which is something that in the Soviet times certainly was not the case.
And we'll leave it there. Who knew 2020 that last year and this year, and by this year, there'll be 2 wars raging in the world? We hope for an end to this conflict on either sides of the spectrum. Thank you for coming on the program today, Mr. Peter Dickinson, editor at Odessa Review in Ukraine.
Thank you.
Now, dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters rallied outside the offices of Hollywood heavyweights United Talent Agency, UTA, and Metro-Goldwyn Mayer, MGM, in Beverly Hills, alleging censorship of actors and artists who speak out against Israel action in Gaza. Tuesday's protests in Beverly Hills were in response to reports the UTA had dropped Academy Award-winning actor Susan Sarandon over remarks she made while addressing a pro-Palestinian protest in New York last month. Separately, Scream actor Melissa Barrera was fired from the franchise by Spyglass Media Group after resharing a post on social media supporting Hamas.
Actresses, actors, celebrities have also joined the call, spoken out for a ceasefire, spoken out against genocide, and they've been retaliated by talent agencies like UTA, by associations like Spyglass, and so we're here, wherever people are supporting the genocide of the Palestinian people, enabling the genocide, silencing people's right to speak, right to protest, right to resist, we have to mobilize there as well. So that's why we're here in front of UTA.
And that media entities are actually punishing people for speaking out. It's outrageous. Hollywood has a history of this. It was done to people in Hollywood during the McCarthy era, and now they are actively engaging in it themselves.
They can't, it doesn't make sense the way they're reacting to it, because they've just built up this whole messaging within throughout a lot of the content they do about diversity, inclusivity. There's a term woke going around. Black Lives Matter happened. They were really capitalizing on that. They spent a long time building up to being fair and equitable to the LGBT community, and now they're doing this, where they're just turning around and just ignoring just being pro-Palestine, because it's just going to give away the game. So it's ridiculous.
Again, firing people is a means of deplatforming actors who are saying Free Palestine, and again, that is using power to hurt the powerless.
As it stands, the combat continues in Gaza, the northern and southern part. Israel says that it's the most intense. People are displaced and casualties continue to happen on both sides. We'll keep bringing you all the news on the Israel-Hamas war on Channels Television. Thank you for watching us for this edition. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a good day.